Welcome to the Gen Z Stoic Podcast,
where every week we strive to lead younger generations on a path to virtue through the insight of Stoic teachings and personal stories from our lives as Gen Z Stoics. Welcome to this week's episode of the Gen Z Stoic Podcast. I am your co-host, Ren.
And I am your co-host, Mateo. And today we are having the privilege of welcoming Zakariya Frank to the podcast. Zak is the CMO of beatcancer.org, which is a 47-year-old nonprofit organization that educates people on holistic ways to prevent or beat cancer. In addition to free personalized counseling for cancer patients, beatcancer.org has a wide variety of educational programs, and they have trained hundreds of holistic cancer coaches all around the world. Also known as Zak The Health King, Zak hosts a podcast titled The Health King's Court, Ancient Wisdom and Modern Health. The podcast covers matters of physical health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, and anything in between. Zak, thank you for coming on to the podcast today, and welcome to the Gen Z Stoic.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be here. As soon as I saw your show, I knew it was a great fit, and so I'm really happy to be here.
Well, thanks for reaching out. And so we'll start off around Stoicism and your kind of journey with a Stoic mindset and your Stoic journey. Where did you start and where has it led you to now?
Yeah, I never really considered myself follower of the Stoic mindset, but I certainly align with a lot of the principles. I think, like anything that has a label and has a name on it, there's a bunch of people that kind of become ridiculous with it on the internet, but that doesn't mean that the core tenets of it actually aren't very fundamentally important to living, and I think especially living as a man. So, I think it's a lot of people are lost, and myself included, especially when I was younger. And, there's not really a good mental framework and foundation that's been given to young men to lead them into success as an individual or as eventually a head of a family or as even just a contributing member of society that can all live with themselves. And so I think the reason we're seeing a surge of stoicism is kind of like that swing back, that push back of young men kind of coming to comprehend and adopt age-old ancient ways of existing as a man to even just live throughout their days and not feel so wandering and lost. And so as I kind of had my own journey over the years, I've kind of adopted and played around with different mental frameworks and foundations and, had my own phases of life. And the more I've aligned, I guess you could say, with the tenets of Stoicism, the more fulfilled I've found my days being, if that answers the question.
And, talking about that, I think that's something that a lot of men can relate to, is that there seems to be two extremes when it comes to role models and what you can consider like social media in the digital age, right? There's like the Andrew Tate kind of hyper masculine, maybe taking Stoicism over the edge or misrepresenting Stoicism. And then there's also, kind of the other side of the spectrum, which is rejecting a lot of what masculinity is and considering a lot of core aspects of masculinity to be bad, to be negative. And I think for men in today's society, when they see that, it's easier when you have one side that says reject your core identity and one that says take it to the max. Then a lot of men are going to say, yeah, I'm going to take it to the max. Why would I reject what being a masculine man is? But that's still an issue, right? Because hypermasculinity, there's a lot of negative aspects to that we've seen a lot of what you can consider the manosphere, where the teachings are misrepresented to be stoicism or a certain kind of philosophy, and they're supported by examples of nice cars and beautiful women and things like that are nice for sure. We all want to drive nice cars and have an attractive wife and have a nice family, but they're not necessarily markers of living fulfilled. So for you, when did the journey kind of solidify in a sense? When did you say that like these are the tenets that are helpful? You mentioned when you kind of aligned. When did that point happen for you?
Yeah, and I think the first caveat to the conversation is that it's important to understand that it's really a trap to try to find the one-size-fits-all solution. I don't really think there's anything wrong with the Andrew Tate-esque figures, or even if, I don't know if there's any that kind of come close to being in his lane, but I think it's important to understand that there are people that will align with that more extreme kind of alignment, and then there's people that will be on all levels of the spectrum. And there's not necessarily a wrong or right answer for any of those people. You know what I mean? When we try to kind of give overall prescriptions of men should be like this, okay, well, some maybe, and then there's that spectrum where everyone can kind of calibrate themselves on. And so the reason I give that answer is because it was actually finding the words of Andrew Tate that kind of really helped me calibrate myself. You know, I've kind of always been someone that was more on the extreme side. I'm not afraid to kind of take things and go crazy with them. But I think as someone that's able to read between the lines and kind of read the nuance and kind of understand the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, behind the public persona. It was honestly finding his speakings and his works about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago that really kind of helped me comprehend what I would say are the tenets that I live by now that are more so aligned with Stoicism than they are not.
Yeah, I think, to kind of speak onto that, I think the problem that I sort of find with these figures is that you're posturing yourself off of one person. I think authenticity is a big deal, and I think that people, especially young men, when they see figures like that on either side or on any side of the spectrum, and they try and model off of them, you're not going to be that person. Like, you're not going to be an exact cut and dry copy paste of Andrew Tate or anybody for that matter. And so we have people who decide that I'm going to do all of these things and kind of reject inner things, inner characteristics that are intrinsic to themselves, right? Because they're pursuing being what I would call like a second-rate Andrew Tate instead of a first-rate version of themselves. And that I
Yeah.
think is a bit problematic, especially as it relates to any social media figure. And that's one of the, we talk about social media all day, but that's one of the negatives I see with social media.
Absolutely. And it's such a weird thing, right? It's like you can take inspiration from anything or anyone around. And that's kind of what this external world is for. How can we exist in this world without taking some sort of example or lessons or using things as points of reference? That's what this whole world around us is for. But at the end of the day, yes, you have to remember, don't try to just carbon copy clone anybody. You know what I mean? It's such an interesting thing that you just mentioned because it's so much easier said than done to, I guess, not lose yourself or to live true to yourself because who even are we? Right? Like, how do we maintain who we are on the inside and make sure that we don't kind of lose those things? What does that even mean? What if we don't like anything about ourselves? What if we want to change who we are on the inside because we find that the results that we're getting in life are indicative of who we are on the inside, and that's not favorable? So it's a very interesting conversation, right? It's sometimes, do we need to completely change who we are on the inside? Or do we ever even know who we are on the inside? Can we ever actually find out? Or are we always just responding to the environment around us and kind of molding ourselves and remolding ourselves as we see fit?
And I think stoicism's a good kind of antidote to the confusion. If you're like, not the confusion, but just when you're asking those questions and you're like, who am I? Do we know who we are? Or are we just a representation of our thoughts and of of our past habits and whatnot? And the thing that's interesting about, I agree with both of you on the Andrew Tate thing, because you can take bits and pieces of people like that all across. You can be like, yeah, I agree with this, I don't agree with that, but I agree with this from this guy. And it could be two people who completely disagree, but you agree with things from them individually. And that's kind of where stoicism is interesting, because it challenges you to think for yourself, and it's not challenging you to be just like XYZ person. It says you need to be your own person, but you have to find the things that you agree with and just act on those. And we spend so much time trying to be like other people. I think that's why we're struggling to find out who we are, is because we're modeling ourselves after other people. And there's nothing wrong with having role models, but if you kind of get off on a tangent so far to where you're forgetting that you need to be yourself and you're just trying to be a carbon copy of this other person, then you're kind of defeating the purpose of stoicism. The purpose of stoicism is not to be like Andrew Tate. It's not to be like Jordan Peterson, right? It's not to be like David Goggins. It's to take the characteristics that they're offering you that can help live the good life, kind of mold them to yourself, and then be who you are.
Yeah, I certainly think there's no argument about that. All things are just a reference and take what works, leave what doesn't, and move on. And, it's kind of the idolatry of these figures, the Goggins, the Tates, the Petersons, that sets people up for a lot of failure and just kind of sets them up for kind of disappointment, even because when people find themselves looking up to figures in this idolizing way, then when something is happening that they don't agree with by one of these figures, then they kind of either go into this like cope and they try to adopt the mindset that they can do no wrong, so what they're doing must be right, or they kind of just get dissonant and then they get mad at the person as if like they have personally failed them. You know what I mean? Because they're not 100% living what they think that idolized figure should be. It's a very strange thing that people do when they kind of look up to people outside of themselves. It's there's a lot of mental traps in it for sure.
And I think what it boils down to is one of the favorite topics that Stoics talk about is the difference between internal circumstances and the external world. You know, we mentioned we live in a world where our external circumstances are present 24/7, right? You pick up your phone and you can see halfway across the world some guy is saying this or taking a video of this. And we've conditioned ourselves to prioritize those external circumstances, those external role models, those external teachings over our internal selves. And so the solution that Stoicism offers is by focusing on your internal self and really molding that, then you are stronger to say, okay, well, I understand what my values are. I understand what my purpose is. I understand what I want to get out of life. This aligns with what Andrew Tate says when he says this. This aligns with what Jordan Peterson says when he says this. And you can kind of avoid that cognitive dissonance. When they say something that's out of line with your beliefs, you can say, all right, well, I don't agree with that. That's not, they're not my identity, so I don't feel attacked because they said something that I disagree with. No, I know who I am. I know that when I listen to a Goggins speech at 4 a.m. when I'm going for my run, like, this is good. This is great. When, Goggins says, I don't really disagree with anything Goggins says, so I can't think of an example of something Goggins saying that I would disagree with, but right, Andrew Tate, some of the more kind of edgy stuff he says about women, maybe it's a joke, maybe it's not. I don't disagree. I don't agree with all of that. And so it's not like I'm going to be like, oh my God, this sucks. I hate this dude. Or like, okay, I guess I have to agree with that. No, like I know like Andrew Tate, when he talks about motivation and working hard, like that's great. I understand completely 100% on board with that. But the social issue stuff, maybe I don't have to listen to him on that. So it's about kind of programming ourselves in a digital age to say, I don't care about the external circumstances until I know what I'm about. I know who I am. I know what my values are. And that takes a lot of work. And people don't want to do that. And so I think that's how we've gotten programmed to that point.
I think it takes work, and I think it also just takes life experience, until you have an actual life of your own to weigh certain opinions against. It's all just kind of conjecture. It's all just kind of, it's not solidified. It's not real, until you have actual experiences and circumstances that you've placed yourself in that have kind of shown the validity or invalidity of whatever kind of opinion we're talking about. None of it really is real. And until you have those things, I don't think you really can even know yourself. It's a very interesting thing that happens over the years. I know you guys are quite young, and hearing this as someone your age probably sounds so kind of cliche at this point. But, as a 28-year-old, even, I'm young myself. But in the last decade that I've been living, I would say even real life, because real life doesn't start until you're probably 18, 19, maybe even 20. I don't know. Some people never even does because they never even start putting themselves in real scenarios. But until you really kind of start gathering experiences to weigh against, it's a very interesting thing that happens when we think we have solidified opinions and thoughts. It's very interesting.
And I've noticed as well, and even being young, and like you said, I mean, we're kind of starting to enter adulthood in the real world and kind of starting to get slapped in the face by realities of how expensive it is to live, or, how people are actually assholes and stuff like that. Even with that, I've noticed a lot of change. Like I keep my values, but all my opinions are constantly being questioned. And I'm like, oh, maybe a little this here and there. And there. It's kind of like a free flowing thing, which I think is amazing, because the more I reread meditations, the more I realize how everything is just constantly evolving and constantly changing. So at times if you ask yourself, like, why can I never figure this out? Why am I always changing my mind or thinking about new possibilities? I mean, that's how it's supposed to be. Nothing is fixed, right? The only thing guaranteed in life is that we're going to die at some point. So having a not fixed mindset about a lot of things is good. That means you're challenging and questioning things. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't have, fixed values that you're living by. That's a whole nother different story. But Ren, as well, to your point, I think one of the reasons that we're so stuck in this mindset of, if one guy says something bad, that means we have to hate the guy, or if one guy says something good, we have to love the guy, whatnot, is look at politics. And I'm not trying to be political here, but we or not even politics, but just people we idolize in general. And the way the media works is you see these crunchy headlines and whatnot. This person said this, canceled, boom, no second chances. There's no forgiveness. There's no holistic picture of a person. It's like a one and done type of thing. And so, Zak, I kind of want to bring it back to you now. What does it mean to live holistically conscious? Because that was one of the things you were wanting to talk to us about. And when you talk about cancer, you talk about cancer holistically and curing cancer holistically, but you also talk about living and being holistically conscious. So what does that mean?
Yeah, and so I think this is one of the fundamental issues that people face as individuals and as that society faces as a result of that. I think people have this compartmentalized way of thinking that kind of gets programmed into them by the school systems and culturally that sets people up for failure because nothing exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists just here's this and this alone without anything else surrounding it and interplaying with it and interacting with it. Everything is holistic. What does holistic mean? It just means you're considering everything as parts of a whole. Holistic health. What does that mean? That means to consider our health as a total package, our mind, our body, our spirit, and even those have kind of subsections that have to be considered as interacting with each other. If we just look at our physical vessels, well, my arm right now, if my arm is hurting, well, what's going on with my arm? Well, in my arm, there's veins, there's lymph nodes, there's fascia, there's all these different things that are interacting, not just in the arm itself, but from my torso into my arm. And even the nerve lines that run through my arm run down to the legs. Like, it's all connected. And this is important to understand because if we try to spot, comprehend things, and then spot treat things when we have an issue, well, then we're missing the root cause of most things. And this has ramifications in all capacities, not just physical, but emotional, spiritual, everything. And so to live holistically conscious to me means that you consider honestly just everything and every decision and every moment that you spend doing anything relates and reacts and has a butterfly effect towards every other element and aspect of your life. How you do one thing is how you do all things. And so this is kind of getting roundabout, but the point is you need to consider really every single action and every single thought and every single anything that you're doing in life and how it relates to the overall bigger picture of what you're getting out of life because nothing is separable. Everything is systematic. Everything is connected to everything else. That's kind of what it means to live holistically and live consciously and kind of consider advancing in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the school system because Mateo and I both hate the school system in America. It feels almost evil at times and a disservice to a lot of the younger kids in terms of what we don't teach. And one of the things that we focus on is the fact that philosophy is very important in terms of emotional health and mental health, which are two key aspects I feel to living holistically. Obviously, you have physical health, spiritual health, but philosophy is something obviously we're both very passionate about. And so I'm just curious, in terms of your opinion, the integration of philosophy into living holistically conscious, because philosophy can teach you a lot about perspective and how to maintain, positive emotions, which, when you get into a negative emotional spiral, it takes a toll on your physical health. It takes a toll on your mental health. It takes an overall toll. So just your thoughts on the role of philosophy in living fulfilled in terms of holistic well-being.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential and it's unavoidable. It's because if you don't have your own internal philosophy, then you don't have any sort of framework to build your life on. And without any framework, without any foundation of the philosophy to drive your actions, you're really just building a house of cards that is inevitably going to fall because either you realize that you didn't agree with anything that you were doing in the first place, or you realize perhaps you were building down a false path and in a wrong direction that needs to be now dismantled to move in a new direction. The kind of driving philosophy is what everything else kind of stems from. And so it depends. Are we talking about philosophy in the sense of, oh, we have to be studying, ancient historical philosophers like in an academic setting? Or are we talking about, like, what are we even saying when we say philosophy? Are we just talking about considering why we do anything? And I guess why is the fundamental question of philosophy. So if we're talking about philosophy in the structure of just considering your why, then yeah, I think that's actually the framework for anything else to be built upon.
I think the also to add on to Ren's question, because philosophy, it's the love of wisdom, or the love of knowledge. Like, so when you talk about living holistically and knowing your why, do you think that there's kind of a universal knowledge or wisdom that we have to obtain in order to understand what our why is? Because something interesting about all the philosophies, Eastern philosophies, the Western philosophies, ones that existed in completely different time periods and whatnot, is how similar they are, because of they're simply trying to understand human nature. And because humans aren't that different, they come to a lot of conclusions that are similar, maybe through different pathways. But I guess, is there sort of like a universal wisdom or knowledge that we need to understand our why?
God, that's a big question, man. I don't think so. I think there's so many different flavors to say the same thing, like you were saying, and as long as the philosophy and the way that you choose to express it comes from a state of humanitarianism and comes from a state of benevolent purpose, then I think you're a net positive for the world at large and probably will have a better time as an individual than if you're living to the contrary. And I think a lot of people are living to the contrary in the sense that their actions and their mental experience is coming from a state of anti-human and kind of anti-humanitarianism and ex, ex, what's the word, like extinct, like making everyone go extinct, because a lot of people have been convinced that humans fundamentally are bad and that we need less people in the world and that God doesn't exist. And I think all of these things have different exact forms that they take in a person's life and how they then build upon that. But I think in the absence of those comes the pro human experience. And that's kind of the prerequisite, I would say, for any healthy personal philosophy to be built. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Two kind of questions stem off of that relate for me. One, where do you think that kind of sentiment started? Because for me, when I was growing up, like I was a healthy child, and then once I kind of got exposed to, I guess, the not innocent world, like it's a wave of that kind of argument. And then two, what is kind of the antidote to that? How do you counteract that within your personal life, especially when you're inundated with that constantly?
I don't think that concept perhaps ever started. I think perhaps it always was. I think there is no light without dark. There is no God without Satan, or whatever words and language you want to use to describe those two things. I don't think there's any good without evil. And I think this entire existence as humans has always been and will always be an eternal battle between good and evil. And I don't know if there was a beginning. I think it just is what it is. And so obviously those that are on the side of God and on the side of good and on the side of humanity are those that are the soldiers for good. And I think those that are fighting for the extinction of humanity and to have less people and to kill your babies and run around and nothing matters and being all nihilistic and atheistic are on the side of evil, whether they kind of understand that they are or they think that it's just totally random. I think they are doing the bidding of evil. And so I don't think at a large scale there's perhaps even a start to it. I think that's kind of just the purpose of humanity and consciousness as a whole. But I think if you look at it in the individual level, it starts early. It starts right back in the school system when you get fed lies and garbage. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people's home life and family structure, even the ones that claim to be representing God and be representing good, and you could send a kid to Saturday school, Sunday school, whatever religious school you send them to, and be kind of talking about religion in a good and positive meaning way, but I think there's a lot of families that try to do that, but then aren't living themselves true to goodness and true to God, and aren't modeling good, healthy existences as men, as women, as mothers, as fathers, and as family units. And so I think a lot of children are just kind of left thrown to the wolves, and with a unhealthy representation of what it means to be godly or on the side of good, and with only the examples of kind of social media and movies and media and Hollywood and all the satanic garbage that is around. Um, and when people kind of don't have that calibrating beacon of light to turn to, I think it's easy to get lost in darkness.
Something I've noticed as well with your good and evil, or dark and light analogy, whatever you choose to believe in, is that it's very hard to realize that you can't have both if you've only been experiencing one. So like what I mean by that is, if you've only really experienced kind of a good life, then you're not really going to understand. You're going to have this like victim mentality when bad things happen to you. I know plenty of people who grew up very comfortable, had like really no problems at all. I mean, obviously everybody has problems, but nothing significant enough that was like really life altering or like forced them to have to undergo a change. And so if you never experience that, then when those things happen to you, you're kind of like, why is this happening to me? This shouldn't be happening to me. Like, I'm entitled, like this, I don't deserve any of this and whatnot. But like Red and I, for example, I mean, we didn't grow up in the greatest of circumstances necessarily. And so we had to make changes for ourselves if we wanted to live the best life that we could in our environment. And so I guess it's if everything was perfect, then nothing would be perfect at all. And if everything was bad, then nothing would be bad all the time, because everything would all just be the same. When we preach about stoicism as well, I think it's interesting to bring up the concept that it's actually good that there are people who don't follow it, and it's good that there are people who are on the opposing side. Like even as a Christian, I'm like, it's good that there are people who are atheist or who are agnostic and whatnot, because then that allows for perspective. You can really see what you're fighting for. You can see why you believe in a certain thing, and then you're really able to make an argument for what's good in your truth. And that's an answer I kind of got out of your response to my question. Was, I feel like the universal truth is just individual to us. We have to figure out what it is for us. That's kind of the universal nature of it all. Is it's going to be individual to what we believe and what we truly value. It's not going to be the same for anybody. I mean, it's not like the world's not one communist big party or whatnot, right? We all have to figure out what matters the most to us. But that's kind of the golden thread, is we all get to choose.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people even have that last part kind of wrong, and they haven't quite figured out that last part, the we all get to choose part. And obviously we see a lot of trying to impose upon others certain belief structures, whether they're good or bad. And I don't think that ever leads to a good and positive interaction. Even if you think you have the best of intentions, trying to impose upon others in a non-defensive way, in actuality, I think those people are lost. And obviously, history is full of people trying to impose upon others, thinking they had the right answer. It's an interesting thing, you know. We always think that we're the good guys. I think.
We always think we're the good guys, and history is always written by the winners. Are two core things that I always keep in mind. And I think when we talk about the difference between good and evil, I think one thing the Stoics talk about is not even defining those things. It's just living out those values. And I think people are too worried about the fact where you're like, all right, I have my set of values, but is my neighbor, how does my neighbor act? Can I change my neighbor's actions? And at a certain point, while we do want to have as good a society as we can with as many you know, loving people as possible who are living great values, at a certain point, we have to throw up our hands and say, if they're going to continue to be lost, then it's not my job to help them find something. It's only my job to preach my values, and the people who will listen, and the people who won't listen won't. It's something, I think we've realized, especially hosting this podcast, is when you're on the internet, even if you're saying the most basic thing, like be a good person, somebody's going to find something to hate about that. And that's something that's really reinforced that belief, I think, for both of us, is that the only goal you have, the only purpose you have in life, what you should focus on is just yourself and discovering what those values are. And I think that focus means that if you grow up in a terrible home where you have parents who are terrible role models, you don't base yourself off of those experiences, you say, or the experiences of what you consider to be good people who are living good lives. You say, what makes me feel fulfilled? What makes me feel good? What do I feel? When do I feel like I'm a contributing member of society? Instead of, again, all of these external things. It always boils down to that internal versus external. And when we apply that to this conversation, it's those people who are lost at a certain point. You just have to feel sorry for them and move on. It's a rough thing to say, but that's the reality.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the overall arc of someone that's on their self-betterment journey, right? It gets to a point where you feel I would be psychopathic to not want to share this divine truth that I've discovered, whatever that may be, with other people. And so you want to go and run and tell the world. And then you, through doing things like that, I think, come to realize no, a lot of people either aren't ready for this message, or they'll never be able to accept it, or it's a fight to try and tell people this. So why bother? Perfectly said by you. Just kind of be the example, be the beacon of whatever you stand for, and let those that are meant to find you and kind of guide them with good intentions. That's all you can really do. But it all comes down to, like you were saying, finding your why. Because when we're talking about, or when you were talking about people observing their parents and realizing that they don't want to become like them, unless you were thinking about your why and kind of analyzing yourself at that meta level, you might not even realize that you are becoming the very thing that you hate and becoming the very thing that you dislike about your parents. And you don't realize that it's kind of crept in over the years, those same behaviors, those same habits, those same traits. Unless you're analyzing yourself constantly and living consciously, it's very interesting, the traps that we can find ourselves falling down.
I absolutely agree. And there's one of my favorite quotes is Marcus Aurelius. He says, "Waste no time arguing what a good man should be, just be one." And you always model the people who talk less and just do more. You look up to the people who are actively doing something, not talking about doing something. I mean, sure, you can look up to Goggins when he's giving these speeches, but the reason we look up to him is because he does what he says. So I think it's even more important to just do the things rather than do them and then talk motivationally about them in the first place. But another thing I wanted to touch on as well is, like you said, becoming the thing that you were kind of seeking to destroy or whatnot. There's another quote, and this isn't Stoic, I don't think. It's just a quote that I heard. But it goes, a man has two lives, and the second starts when he realizes that he only has one. And I think that's how it goes. But that's absolutely true, because when I was about, I would say 13, 14, entering, freshman year of high school, sophomore year of high school, it felt like an entirely different life, because I felt like I was just going through the motions. Looking back, it feels like a completely separate life that I lived. They just feel like memories. And I remember the exact moment where Ren and I sat down together and we were like, podcast, Stoic, Marcus Aurelius, like knowledge. You know what I mean? Everything changed because everything felt so purposeful. Even when I started lifting when I was like 15, I still hadn't found my why. I just kind of picked it up. But as soon as you find your why, everything in your life becomes aligned with it subconsciously, whether you want to see it or not. It's almost like, you know, in psychology, when you become conditioned, you just become conditioned to seeing things through this lens. Or like, for example, I used to play chess in class so much, like all the time, that I started seeing the desks as like chess pieces. And I was like, if I was at this desk, like where could I move? It's just the act of repetition, finding your why and then repeatedly becoming what we do that makes the big difference. And that's what is becoming, an exemplary person, is just doing and doing and doing over and over.
Yeah, absolutely. The repetition is not the glamorous part. It's not the sexy part. It's the part that, sometimes things are going to take more repetitions than you think you have in you. That's when the real men are made. That's when the real kind of progress happens, when you're able to do those repetitions beyond the motivation kind of wearing off, beyond those hits of dopamine of, oh yeah, I'm going to change my life, I'm going to do that thing, and I'm going to be so great for it. When that all wears off and you still do those repetitions, that's when the real progress is made. That's when you really find yourself.
And that's called self-discipline. And I think self-discipline is one of the biggest things that I think men overall are lacking nowadays. And I think it's an underrated key to living holistically is self-discipline, right? takes being self-disciplined to say, when I experience this negative emotion, I snap myself out of it because I realize that nothing productive is going to come from this. It takes self-discipline to say, I am going to put in the work when I don't feel like going to the gym, or I don't feel like going for this run. Self-discipline says, no, this is what I'm about. This is how I'm going to get to where I want to go. And self-discipline is something that isn't taught, I don't think, in a lot of schools nowadays. I think, especially as we continue to integrate AI, and it seems we keep circling back to the school issue. I wonder why. But as we continue to integrate all these tools, school does not teach self-discipline. It teaches actually self-doubt, I would say, in a lot of regards, and it teaches a lot of lies, like you said. And so we have to kind of find, outside of the school system, outside of what we're conditioned, what calls us to be self-disciplined. And that's where I think that a lot of those figures that we mentioned from the top, like Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, David Goggins, that's why they're so popular, is because they're the calling to self-discipline, because all of those men are self-disciplined. And you've seen the results, right? Andrew Tate, very successful. Jordan Peterson, very successful. David Goggins, very successful. So if we can put more role models like that, I think, on a scale, and instead of celebrities who preach terrible values and don't have self-discipline and, do drugs and do all these terrible things, then I think that's where we start to get on the right track as a society.
Yeah. Self-discipline can't be taught. It can only be modeled. That's it. You can't teach someone. No words that you say can actually instill self-discipline in someone. It can only be modeled from good examples and then experienced and tried and then developed over time. You can't just even see the epitome of self-discipline and then all of a sudden have self-discipline. What can be taught are values. And those values can be used as the driving forces behind actions that allow for the building of self-discipline. Anything that we do, we should kind of comprehend the driving value behind it. Whether it's, I'm not going to pick up that cake because I will value my long-term health goals more than I value the temporary sensation that is that delicious sugary cake. When we start to weigh everything as value propositions and kind of act on the more delayed gratification, long-term and meaningful values, that's kind of how we set the foundation to teach ourselves discipline, by teaching ourselves to follow our values.
Well, and to your point about the delayed gratification, the reason that most people never actually get started, well, they will get started, but because it takes a while, they won't see results and then they'll quit. That's the hardest part, is kind of seeing that first delayed result. Because we're so result oriented, we have to see physical or progress. We need to see it in physical form to know that it's real. That's kind of how we work, or else we just call it faith, right? So if we can see a feasible result from the work that we've put in, then we're going to be more incentivized to make it a habit. For example, the gym, you won't see progress for the first good 2 months, likely. I mean, that was for me. It took 2 months until I got my first bicep vein. And then I was like, oh, I'm like, it works. You know what I mean? But that's the point. Is like, most people would give up after a month and be like, this doesn't work. Like, this isn't working. What if it was a month and 1 day? You could have quit the day before you're about to see a result, right? And the thing you said as well is, because self-discipline can't be taught, that's exactly why you have to know your why. Because if you're just living aimlessly, you're not going to discipline yourself to anything, because you're not going to know why you're doing it in the first place. I hated taking these, classes in college that had no relevance towards my major, because I was like, why? This doesn't align with what I want. But the classes that were tough, that were aligned with my major, I was a lot more incentivized to kind of persevere through, because I knew what I wanted. So switching up, I guess, a little bit, I'm curious, because we've been talking about the education system, and this is good because it sucks. But I would also like to talk about the medicinal system as well, because they were kind of influenced by the same guy, and that's Rockefeller. And this is a name that gets mentioned a lot. So we know Rockefeller influenced the education system, right? He wanted a nation of workers, not thinkers. But he also had a lot of influence on the medicinal system, because he was so in control of petroleum and oil. He had a lot of influence on the petro-based medicine, which kind of abolished the holistic approach to medicine. And as someone who's experienced in this holistic medicinal field with in the cancer field specifically, I'm curious on on kind of your view on health holistically, and why you're doing what you do, what is your why behind the healthcare system specifically? Because you could have chose, a holistic education system. You could have chosen holistic nutrition, but specifically you're kind of focusing in on cancer. So why is that for you?
Well, it all really comes down to health. Without health, we have nothing else, right? Nothing else matters to an individual if they're sick and if they die. Then it's game over, done. So, it's kind of the foundation that a good life and a good existence can be built upon, because it doesn't matter how much discipline you have in other realms. It doesn't matter how much accomplishment and achievement and how great a person you are in other realms. If you get sick and die, now you're done. Like, game over, like I said. So, that's kind of the basis point for all of reality, an individual's health. And as I made changes of my own health habits and what have you, and experienced a greater cognitive ability, a greater spiritual ability, a greater just overall life fulfillment, it just sparked such a passion for me to be able to equip others with that same knowledge. And it's like the medic in the field in war, right? That might not be the most sexy position, that might not be the most like glamorous position, but if you're kind of in the field and getting your soldiers back up ready for battle, well, you could be the difference in winning or losing the battle overall, right? I just want to equip my soldiers. I just want to equip the soldiers on the side of good in this world to maximize their life potential, to maximize their health, to maximize their abilities to go do good things. And I find it to be quite a noble mission, and it's one that I very much enjoy. And in regards to cancer specifically, I happen to network and meet the CEO of the organization that I run now. And so that's how I kind of got involved in the cancer space specifically. Cancer or not having cancer is kind of synonymous with being healthy or not being healthy. It's kind of one and the same.
And I'm curious your perspective working closely in this field on big pharma's perspective, because big pharma is kind of what rules the healthcare field in this country. And I think a lot of people individually have come to realize that holistic well-being is much better than the spot it and treat it method of medication, which seems to be the norm in this country. And we talked about Rockefeller. I'm curious your perspective, because you work more closely than we do and see probably this more than we do. Is that really the truth? And how big of a difference is it once you realize that it's not a spot it, treat it kind of condition? It's I'm going to holistically live my entire life so that my risk is mitigated.
I mean, it's like the difference between, I don't know, trying to walk around at night with sunglasses on and earmuffs versus actually taking those things off and living in real life. It's real life. We're not talking about Western petropharmaceuticals medicine versus holistic natural medicine. We are talking about real medicine versus synthetic bullshit. It's just fake. It's not real. It's not real life that these institutions are built upon. It's complete fallacy, and it's 100%, like you mentioned, just for the sale of petro drugs and chemical bullshit, and it's just for the sake of harming people. Because an empowered and healthy people don't subject themselves or allow themselves to be subjected to all of the other bullshit, all of the other systems, all of the other branches or tentacles of the fucking beasts of the matrix or the system or whatever you want to call the evil establishments and kind of interwoven organizations that are running things. Yeah, I mean, it's the difference between living in a real reality that works and living in La La Land.
There's a saying that says a patient cured is a patient lost, and it's something that big pharma, that you could say conspiracy for the sake of keeping our channel up and running and whatnot. But they're like, oh well, if we cure people, that means we don't get their money anymore. The more people we cure, the less money we're bringing in, and it's very apparent now that the FDA is garbage. They don't care about what they approve. I did a project on this. It's a volunteer system, essentially, is getting things approved. It's a generally recognized as safe system. So like, oh yeah, I mean, it's pretty safe. Go ahead. And they're like, all right, I'll take your word for it and approve it. That's why you have things like red 40, caramel color, like phthalates in the soaps and whatnot. You have sunscreens being recalled with benzene and things like this that are horrible that we should never be even getting close to putting on our bodies, let alone inside of us and consuming them. And so you really begin to ask yourself, how much do these people really care about our individual health, or how much do they really care about the dollar in their pocket? Look at the stores. 90% of the food that exists in stores wasn't around 100 years ago. All of this stuff that's being created, do you think, this is what I think. I think a lot of it's just this big business. I think America's running fully on a business now. I think the health, like the big pharma, not your healthcare approach, but big pharma is a big part of, that money scheme and that business to keep the money flowing. So I'm curious on what you think about all of, because you said it's tentacles, there's branches, it's everywhere. And I totally agree. So I want your opinion on that.
Yeah, my viewpoint is a little more esoteric and a little more spiritual. I think, when you understand that at the top, this doesn't mean the general worker drones, but at the top of all these establishments, the ones actually making the decisions, they have so much money you wouldn't even believe numbers go that high. And whatever they don't have, they can print more. It's not about money. It's about control. It's about the spiritual battle. It's about expanding their extinctionist movement. It's really about keeping people sick and dying and suffering and feeding off that energy like the parasites they are. They don't need money. They really don't. It's far beyond money, is my honest thoughts on it.
And I guess I should have clarified, because I'm sort of equating money to control in today's world, to money to power, right? I mean, the more money you got, the more power and freedom and control that you have over people and for yourself and whatnot. And that's kind of something that they said that it is a spiritual battle. We are in the middle of the biggest spiritual war of all time. I mean, look at men, testosterone rates, boom. You know what I mean? Like we're being kind of pushed down. I mean, it's in like the water, the food, everything. Our hormones were disrupted by microplastics. Like we're not even thinking the same as we used to. We're not as masculine. We're kind of just senile. You know what I mean? We're kind of weak now. Our testosterone is so low you wouldn't even believe it at this point. People don't understand that our grandparents have as much testosterone as us now. That's how bad it's getting. And if you look up sperm count in 2045, it's projected to 0. So it's like all these things. It is a spiritual war. I 100% agree with you, and I could talk about this for hours, as you can see. But I'm agreeing with your point, and I wanted to just clarify. I agree. It's not just about money, but it's about the control.
Yeah, well said.
And I think that control aspect too. Every institution is a branch. I think that's what people don't realize, and it's an important conclusion to make, is that education branches into this, government branches into this, big pharma branches into this, even down to like the social media aspect. Social media, these are big conglomerates as well. You don't think that these are things that are pushing a specific message as well. We've seen that in politics. We've seen that with social movements. We've seen that with cancel culture. There's so many movements that are just, if you kind of take a step back and look at it big picture, slap you in the face with how interconnected they are. And it's all a web of lies. It's all a web of conditioning. And it's something to where I always think of the movie WALL-E, where we trash the planet to the point where everybody's 400 pounds and on their like scooters in the sky. For some reason, that's what the people in power want. They don't want us to be in power. They don't want us to be healthy. They don't want us to think big picture. Look at the school system. They don't want us to make these conclusions. And you kind of get labeled a conspiracy theorist. And then, my counter argument to that is that's the label that the people in power want to give to people who say things like this. They either A, want them to shoot themselves in the back of the head twice somehow, or they want to label them a conspiracy theorist. And these are the important truths that people must realize, I think, to fully kind of unlock within themselves this idea of living holistically, living to their fullest potential. You kind of have to realize the set of conditions that befall you in terms of who's in power, who's in control, and what the messaging that you are being fed is.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously the origins of the term conspiracy theorist come back from those questioning the official narrative behind the JFK assassination. But, it's just conspiracy reality. We live in a conspiracy reality. And how could we not, right? What does it mean to conspire? It just means to collude and work with other entities to advance an agenda. Well, isn't that everything? Aren't we conspiring right now to spread our message. Don't parents conspire with each other to raise their children in the way that they see fit? Like, everything's conspiracy. So it's just a conspiracy reality that we live in. And so, yeah, obviously the term gets used to reference those talking about things that are against the mainstream narrative. But, I don't even think we should shy away from it. It's a conspiracy reality that we're living in. There are people and entities and organizations conspiring. That's just the way of life. How could it not be?
Speaking of conspiracies, I guess I'll just ask this question. I'm curious. Ren and I had a little discussion about this before we came on. Do you think the cure for cancer exists? It's just being hidden? Or that
The
it...
cure for cancer is not getting cancer in the first place. The cure for cancer is prevention. It's not that complicated. Cancer is just our own cells mutated because they are sick and they're unwell because we have put unhealthy input into our bodies, be it emotional or physical. If you eliminate those things, you don't get it in the first place. Done. That's it. It's not that complicated. When we come to comprehend that cancer isn't some boogeyman disease that floats around and just gets you, or it's not some destiny that you're destined to get because your parents got it. It's not some random thing in your genes that is it gonna get you? Ooh, it bit you. It's a effect, and all effects have causes, either singular or plural, contributory causes that result in our body being so unhealthy in a certain area that our cells turn cancerous. Our body has so many cells that on any given day, we have cells in us that are sick and that are dying, and then they die, and then they get purged, and then new cells take their place. Our cells have their own cycle of life, and they're constantly dying and getting replenished. It's only when those systems get overburdened and overladen with unhealthy cells, and our system's pathways and methods of detoxifying and purging the unhealthy cells get kind of encumbered too much, where they start shutting down, that things turn cancerous. It's that's why I said cancer is synonymous with healthy or unhealthy existence. That's all it is.
So, I know that this is a lot of the messaging of Beat Cancer, an organization you work with. So, what are some of the, without giving away, the company secrets? Obviously, there's kind of a barrier there, but what are some of the prevention strategies that you guys talk about in terms of counseling and all the services you offer?
And that's the thing. We don't claim to have any secrets. We are so open book. We are so straightforward and straight cut. We don't claim to have any sort of secret sauce that or fountain of youth or beacon of light that nobody else can tell you and talk about. We really emphasize fundamentals. Getting the basics right will get someone so far that they wouldn't even believe it, whether that's on the prevention side or on the healing side. And so we break it down into having a mind, body, spirit approach. Firstly, you have to get your mind right. Our mind can be our best friend or our worst enemy, and you can choose which one it is. When we tell ourselves we are sick, when we tell ourselves we're probably going to get sick, when we tell ourselves we're going to die, when we tell ourselves we have an expiration date, our body follows suit. When we tell ourselves we are going to be well, when we tell ourselves we are healthy, when we tell ourselves this too shall pass, we set the mental foundation for healing. When we tell ourselves we have a life worth living, we set the foundation for healing. And so that's kind of the first step, to because you could do all of the good methods and modalities in the world to get your body in a good state. But if your mind is killing it from within, none of it's going to work. And so that kind of mental foundation is the very first step. Then on the physical side, it's really nothing that awesome to hear about. Like I said, the basics. What are you inputting into your body in the form of food, in the form of water, in the form of air, in the form of body products, in the form of, clothing, all of these things that people input into their bodies that they think are not going to have an effect. It's asinine. It's insane how little impact people think their day-to-day actions have. But So yeah, the second step is cleaning up and auditing your physical inputs to your body. And then I think the third, and this is not really in any order, I would say, it is the spiritual side. Because when we have energetic things going on with us, whether that's energetic ties in relationships or emotions that we haven't processed and purged, or just ways that we know we are not living our truth and living our why, then energetically we are being harmed from within as well. And that could set the stage for a lot of disease as well. Um, so we really try to focus on having a mind, body, spirit approach. And that's why everyone's path to healing is so individualized. There is no one size fits all solution to cancer because there's no one size fits all contributory factor for each person. What brings someone to having a state of cancer is a very, very unique and personal thing. And so only through coming to comprehend what has brought an individual to the here and now can you come to comprehend how you can bring them away from this unfortunate circumstance.
I think it's interesting what you're saying, and I actually agree with a lot of it because what's funny is it's such a headache to really think about all the things that we're putting into our body and how they're actually like a lot of them are really bad and we're unaware, right? You're just like, I'm just gonna get a glass of water. Chlorine, chloride, metals, just in a glass of water. You're like, oh, I'm going to eat a piece of bread, 50 ingredients. I'm going to put on some sunscreen, 50 more ingredients, right? I mean, the air, it's polluted now. And it's just all of these factors that are just a daily part of our lives that, granted, it sucks to think about every single thing you put into your body. And that's only the start. You're like, oh, but I'm sure you're familiar now with kind of the emergence of the animal based diet, not solely carnivore, but a lot of fruits, a lot of raw dairy, a lot of raw honey, a lot of red meat and whatnot. You're probably familiar with that, yes?
Yeah, yeah, I'm with it. I'm
Yeah,
with it.
yeah, and I think personally, because it's so simple, that's why it's working so well. Is because we're not overcomplicating things. It's just very simple, very pure ingredients, right? And obviously, even with fruit, it's hard to find an organic farm that's like really, doesn't use a lot of pesticides. I mean, there you go, pesticides, carcinogens, stuff that we use to make our food safer is not really making it safer, which sucks. But I think the emotional and mental part is very interesting as well because this happens to my mom a lot. She'll get not cancer, God, I hope not, but she just gets very like a cold and very sick because she's stressed, simply just being stressed. And she eats healthy, she goes for walks every day, but because she's so stressed with her work, sometimes that's why she gets very sick. So I think you're absolutely right. Our mental state and kind of our emotional and vibrational state as well is definitely a big determinant in our overall health.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you nailed it, man. The truth is simple. Simplicity is real. Simplicity is natural. Now, that doesn't mean the answer is always going to be easy, but people have been led to worship complexity and think that the more complex something is, the more trustworthy it is because it's been thought out by these experts and scientists and put together. And wow, it's so complicated. Wow, someone really worked on this. And ignore the glaringly obvious simple truths that are right in front of them. And it's such a shame that can kind of really extrapolate out into all realms of life. The truth is very often simple, not necessarily easy, but simple. And yeah, the energetic side is so important. Something that we talk about in our course is actually the scientifically observed. It's not just us talking for the sake of talking. Although it's been studied for hundreds of years and cultures all around the world have known this for centuries, it's also actually been scientifically observed, and there's been statistically significant correlations of certain emotions and certain traumas and certain inner personality traits and habits that correlate with specific types of cancer. Our body's organs are all energetic centers. There's certain emotional energies that tuck away in certain organs of our body. And so, very often, when someone has an instance of cancer, and they are one of those people that do everything right on the physical side, a lot of times by figuring out where that cancer is and looking at that correlated emotion and that correlated energy, you can damn well know what's going on in their personal life that perhaps brought them here.
I'm just personally curious about that. Not to put you on the spot, but are there any kind of certain traumas that correlate to certain organs? Because I'd just be curious to hear about that.
Yeah, and so one of them that is very common these days is colon cancer. The colon cancer, well, what is the colon? The colon is the physical organ involved in the elimination of food waste, the elimination of waste and feces from our body. And the types of people that very often find themselves with colon cancer are people that have trouble eliminating emotional waste. What does that mean? Well, people that have a strong victim mentality or victim mindset, people that really hold on to the negative things that happened way back in their childhood or even just some time ago, people that have that I'm this way because of that mentality that that affected me, and so I'll never get over that, or they fail to forgive a significant person that had a perhaps what they think bad influence on their life or a bad impact in their life. People that just can't let go of the past. They're blocked up. They're not purging that out. Well, that specifically has been shown to correlate with instances of colon cancer. Another one, women who have trouble with their children, whether that's a big fight and falling out with their child, death of a child, sickness or illness of a child, and they're worried about their child in that way, or missing children, or they're financially concerned about their children, some sort of disharmony in the mother child relationship. Well, those women often find themselves with breast cancer or ovarian cancer. Of course, both of which are organs that are tied to the mother child relationship and very much involved in motherhood. Obviously, the breast directly connects a mother and a child through breastfeeding. Yeah. And similar energetically for fathers and their children with testicular cancer.
This is super interesting, and as you're saying these things, I'm like, there's no way. So I'm like looking these things up, and even on Stanford Medicine, which is a pretty mainstream website, they're talking about how recently health is being recognized as a balance of many parts, which is more than just the physical environmental factors, like emotional as well. And there, you can even just look it up and see how there's like chronic stress, deep anxiety, deferred hope, disappointment, and whatnot leading to these things. So I think that's really interesting and something that isn't really talked about a lot, because I haven't really heard much about this. Now, granted, I recently actually just lost one of my dogs to a type of cancer, and so I'm actually interested: is cancer in pets or in like animals, like dogs? Because he was the happiest guy of all time. I was like, there was no way that dude was like mentally struggling at all. So is that a different story than in people? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, hey, man, it's hard to say. I think even the happiest of people might be facing inner struggles that you might not know about. So, there's a whole world going on in the mind of dogs. Perhaps he was stressed about certain things, it's hard to say. But, you know, pets face a barrage of physical toxins just like people. I don't know what you were feeding him. I don't know, what perhaps he was injected with at any point. And that's not a blame game, but the point is, pets in general, they do face a lot of the same barrages of chemicals and whatnot that people do. Then you get onto the fact that they absorb energy from their people. And so, a family dog interacting with the whole family, who knows what kind of energy a dog absorbs from being around people. It's a very interesting thing. They're kind of sponges in that way. You ever like have a real bad day and you're stressed or you're sad or you're mad, and you hang out with your dog and you hold him tight and you give him some love and you give him some pets and you feel better. Well, energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed or moved around. So who knows what those little dogs kind of absorb and sacrifice for our own sake. It's an interesting thing.
And just a quick follow up, is there he was in the retriever family, and I know the way that some of these dogs are bred, their gene pool is a lot smaller because they're purebred, and so they're kind of just like, oh, like they're just pure golden retriever or whatnot. And I know there's truth in like a smaller gene pool also being associated with a risk, like a high risk of cancer. I'm just curious, is that, I guess, do you talk about that? I know you don't really talk about pets as much in the, I'm sure in beat cancer, it's more like the human and people. But the smaller gene pool, I'm curious, does that have any validity in the cancer talk as well? Because they are bred in a certain way that there's the lack of variance in their gene pool leads them to get cancer more than other dogs with who have more variance in their gene pool.
I'm not quite sure. I wouldn't necessarily be myself qualified to speak one way or the other. It's a very interesting phenomena that's occurred in dogs because they have been so bred in all these different directions. Who's to say what is good or what's bad? There's probably pros and cons to both directions. I wouldn't claim myself to be qualified to answer that one.
And not to kind of just completely go away from that, but I think another thing, and I know you're specialized in cancer, and that's kind of your career field. I think there's some validity to say that a lot of the diseases that we see, like dementia, like Parkinson's, that are like the big picture things, also kind of follow a similar track, right? Where if you were to look at things holistically and always take care day to day holistically, I think that prevention aspect is a big factor, not only in cancer, but in many of those other diseases.
Absolutely, man. Nothing's random. Nothing's random. And that's why I said earlier in the conversation, yeah, some of my primary work is in the cancer field in regards to running Beat Cancer, but I'm in the health and wellness field in general. All of it's the same. All of it's the same. Obviously, there's different specific ways that certain things play out, but it's a fantastic thing that occurs when people spontaneously get rid of their ailments and diseases that they think are terminal and lifelong once they detoxify their body and start to live a lot differently. I've heard of very fascinating success stories about all sorts of ailments, whether that's cancer, autism, AIDS, Parkinson's, all the above. There's a lot of toxins out there and a lot of different ways that they can build up. And when you undo that, it's very fascinating what can occur in the body.
I think, I mean, even just like adding to your point, a big thing is obesity. We're like, oh, why are we getting so obese? And it's like, I mean, the answer is right in front of us. You know what I mean? It's like, and even I was in Europe recently in May, early May, and I lost like 12 pounds eating like bread and pasta and like red meat and drinking beer. And I was like, this is sick. Like, this is a cheat code. I can just go anywhere and lose 12 pounds. Like, guys, but it's because there are so many things in the food that are banned over there that are not banned here. And I thought that was very interesting because it's not even, you can eat unhealthy, what's considered unhealthy, and lose weight and feel amazing. I mean, my skin was clear. My energy was high. My body fat percentage went down. And I was like, there's something that they're not telling us in America specifically. It's a big deal. And,
Well,
yeah.
that's the thing. One, they are telling us. Satanists operate under karmic retribution and they tell you what they're doing. There's always a paper trail. There's always the breadcrumbs to follow for those with eyes to see and a mind to think. You can see the patents for what they put in the water. You can see the patents for all of the crazy shit that they do that's registered to certain governmental agencies. They tell you flat out what they're doing. And if they don't tell you in plain English in some document that's public information on the internet, they tell you in the movies and in the shows. They will always tell you what they're doing. And then when you allow it to happen to you, it's not on them karmically. It's on you for not doing anything about it. Secondly, in Europe, it's not just about the food, it's also about the water. That pasta, yeah, it's probably made from different wheat in the first place and it has a lot less ingredients. But then the water that it's made with is also treated differently instead of it being tap water. There's definitely a lot of different angles towards certain things that aren't elsewhere that are present in this great experiment that we call America.
That's why I think, when people think about holistic medicine, they kind of think about Eastern medicines, and that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. But I think there's a lot of validity to those Eastern medicines because they are more ancient, right? They haven't been tainted necessarily by these government agencies because they were people who were tribes uh, many thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago, who they weren't concerned about who has the power, who has the control. They were like, look at this plant and the health effects it has. And so I think people need to kind of get deconditioned from all of this Western medicine idea. And when they're living holistically, me and Mateo and I are both big into supplements. And I think supplements are one of those things that people more need to look into because they originate from, I would say, cleaner origins than what a lot of Western medicines come from.
Yeah, there's kind of this glamorization or even like a fetishization of the Eastern Asian approaches when people start diving into holistic health. But that's leaving out a lot of the glorious modalities that are European in descent. And there is a lot of ancient cultural healing practices that come from places like Germany's, the Italy's, the France, all these places that had to maintain life. They had to figure out how to maintain health. And so there's no shortage of modalities outside of Asia. What you alluded to and are very accurate in mentioning is that Asian cultures as a whole have been a lot more resilient to disconnecting from their culture and from demonizing their own culture and trying to get away from it. The Satanists, they want to destroy culture, period. They try everywhere. But those that withstand those attacks and maintain their sense of pride in their nationalism and their sense of pride in their ethno group, they maintain those wonderful traditions that come with it. It's those, I think, European nations and America, obviously, that have been convinced that their cultural preservation is somehow evil and they need to get rid of it all in favor of this modern conglomerate scientificism bullshit that's modern world that have seen their healing arts kind of be lost, unfortunately, more so in the common culture.
This is also why I'm sort of a fan of the I guess the clash between traditionalism and progressive mindsets, because both offer such great ideas, and this is sort of me paraphrasing something that Jordan Peterson said, and it's one of my favorite things. It's tough in a world where it's very very divided, and we want to be one side wants to be right all the time. But I mean, we're all guilty of that to an extent. But what Jordan Peterson was saying is, you need the traditionalist views because that kind of tells you this is what we have done, this is what works. And then we need the progressive mindset as well because it tells us this is what we need to do, this is what hasn't worked, so this is why we need to do this. And you need the dialogue between the two, but you need the dialogue between the two, because now we just have this. We're not a melting pot anymore. We're kind of just we're like sides on a plate. We're very separated into our own groups. We're not this melting pot of ideas anymore, which sucks because when we have these conversations with people civilly and calmly and rationally, and we're able to maybe compromise and meet somewhere in the middle for the betterment and for the bigger picture, like you were saying, the holistic picture, not just what we want, then we might just actually get somewhere. Now, I have a question for you about moving forward for the healthcare system and kind of that holistic approach to health overall. It's not, it's merging. I feel like there's kind of a paradigm shift. I feel like we're slowly starting to realize more and more that just maybe these very large, powerful institutions don't actually have our best interests in mind at heart. Just maybe. That's just a possibility. So I'm curious, what do you think these next steps are in really, marketing out and just really pushing out this holistic ideology that really could save a lot of people?
Yeah, you said a word, merging, and I think there is a merging happening in a way, but not in a benevolent way, and I actually don't like it. I'm not a change the systems guy. I'm not the systems are broken, so we need to go in and advocate for change and advocate for different laws and advocate for different policies. I don't think that's a fruitful endeavor. I think the systems have been operating very much as they were designed and intended to, and they took a stance very clear on where they stood against holistic health and medicine long ago when they, the days of the Flexner report, etc. And now that they are losing ground, only then are they starting to say, well, actually, no, we're with the times. We're hip. We welcome holistic stuff a little bit. Here, we can do integrative approaches. We can integrate some of that holistic stuff. And I think what's happening is a controlled opposition effect. I think they're trying to not lose everyone so starkly and fundamentally. So they're kind of providing themselves as a false path of like, yes, we're going to integrate some holistic stuff into our approaches. But the two don't play. It's like trying to mix oil and water. And so I think the whole integration of holistic stuff into the belly of the beast that is the establishments is more harmful than it is good, because I think it's a half truth and it's really just a big trap to get people into their establishments and remain within their control, where ultimately the framework of their treatment that they're going to receive is that Western or false medicine kind of paradigm. I am for forming our own systems. I am for empowering people at an individual level where they don't need to rely on these large systems. That's more of what I would like to see. And so the next steps that I'd like to see, instead of, falling for the trap that is the kind of controlled opposition, integrative meshing that we're seeing within the establishments that have been operating how they've been operating for so long, I would like to see more people get empowered at an individual level, take control of their own health, be in the driver's seat of their own life, and not have to lean on the systems to begin with, or perhaps form our own, whatever that looks like.
And a kind of follow up to that, I'm kind of curious. Do you think that the internet is going to be helpful or harmful in that?
Both. It's going to be both. It's nothing but a tool. And, through the internet, we're able to have this conversation. Through the internet, I've been able to learn a lot of things that I wouldn't have just poofed into my head otherwise. Through the internet, people are able to connect and form communities and learn skills and read things and watch things that are full of so much good information that you can use to empower yourself. Now, the internet at the same time is also used to obviously purport garbage. The internet at the same time is obviously faced with a ton of censorship of the real information that matters. The internet is still, a creation of the beast itself, but that doesn't mean that we can't kind of swim within it and navigate within it and come out the other side better for it. It's like anything, man. The internet's a tool, and it's here to stay. So whether it's good or bad, I think what we focus on is just try to make the most good of it that we can. What do you think?
I think it's kind of similar to how your solution is individualistic. I think the internet is also going to be individualistic, because you face the choice, right, when you are on social media or on the internet. Am I going to consume good things, or am I going to consume garbage BS that's memes and false information and conditioning? So I think it's individual in terms of how you decide how you're going to use it. If you decide you're going to spread your message and that message is positive, and you surround yourself on the internet with a community that supports your values, then it is going to be positive, because you're building an online community that can turn into that system. But if you choose to consume things that are quick hits of dopamine, if you choose to consume evil messages, if you choose to ignore important information, if you choose not to discover facts for yourself, then you live in this dark, evil place, and it's going to be a bad time for you. It's not going to be great. So I think it depends on the individual person. But I will say that the way the internet works, I think it is easier to fall into the trap of negativity than it is to embrace the positive side of it. That's kind of my answer to that question.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that goes back to who's at the helm of Google and YouTube and all these different entities that are trying to direct people in certain ways and hide people from other ways. It's a powerful tool. With any powerful tool, comes the opportunity for abuse and misuse and great danger, but it also comes the power to do a lot of good. Whether we're talking about guns, you could protect your family with one, or you could kill your family with one. When you're talking about a fast car, you could get to where you need to be real fast, or you could smash yourself into the wall. You know, the internet is so powerful; it's almost infinite and endless in its power. So there's any way there's a huge spectrum of either damage that can be done or beauty that can be done with it.
Well, we kind of just make the same argument for social media in general because, we say, as harmful as it is, without it, we wouldn't be able to spread this message on the podcast, right? So it's like, well, like you said, good and dark, or good and bad, light and dark, and whatnot. That's tough. There's a lot of benefits that we know to the internet and to social media. I mean, I was just able to look up that Stanford article in a matter of minutes and just get that information real quick. But again, like Ren said, it's a lot easier to fall into the trap of censorship and negativity and whatnot in the internet because of, like you said, who's at the helm, who's running, the media or the apps or the social media and whatnot. It's definitely all a game that you just have to kind of play and win, make small wins at a time. So you can it's like the whole game of life. If you want to win, you have to play, right? You have to play to win. That's the only way to really kind of get out for yourself and to get your own freedom.
I think let's even take more responsibility for ourselves, though, because we could say it's the fault of the people at the helm that are censoring certain things, that it's easier to fall down the negative path. But I think it goes back to the personal level of, honestly, the garbage content. It's just fun. It just gets you. Like you just seeing that stupid thing that is entertaining. It makes you want to just sit there. Seeing that garbage that just kind of melts your brain, like it at an individual level is easier to consume than the content that makes you think and then kind of makes you cognate and makes your kind of mental gears turn. So is it the powers that be, or is it our own fault that it's easier to consume that shitty content? Is that just human nature?
It's something that I think is easily conquerable, not to, plug in Stoicism, but Stoicism is a very good antidote to that, right? Marcus Aurelius says, what you think, you become. And that's exactly right. They aren't forcing you to think anything. They just realize if they can continually shove this down your throat, you eventually will think it and you eventually will become it. So how do you not do that? You have the power to not do that. You have the power to say, wait a minute, this is bullshit. Why am I doing this? This is like, sure, it's funny, but what am I getting out of this? You have the power to take that step back. Every single person in the world has that power. And you're exactly right. It's taking responsibility for your actions and for your thoughts, which is exactly what Stoicism calls us, especially as men, to do. To be leaders, we have to be our authentic selves, and that means that the conditioning that we consume, we don't believe in. We have our own independent thoughts, and that's what we become. We think strong, independent thoughts. We become strong, independent men, and that's what the world needs more of. And so, as we kind of wrap up this episode, I'll give you one last question that we like to ask everybody, and it's one that it's tough to answer. But if you had one piece of advice for people who are our age, which there's not much of a difference, I will say, but if you had one piece of advice for people our age, our generation, Gen Z, what would it be?
Don't waste time. Don't waste time. It's the one thing you can never get back. You can make more money, buy yourself that thing that's fun. If you believe in yourself that you're going to make more money, or perhaps save that money, invest in, self-improvement things. But whatever you do, don't waste time, because you don't want to be 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and realize that you'd be a lot farther down the road if you didn't waste all that time that you wasted. So live each day with purpose, live each moment with purpose. Don't forget to have fun, but don't forget to be on your mission either. That would be the number one thing.
Yeah, I definitely stand by that statement. They say the pain of discipline is far less than the pain of regret. So I think just putting in that work now, and like you said, it's about balance, right? We should enjoy our lives, but we should also stick to our missions and stick to our purpose and stay driven. So I don't think you could have said it any better.
Awesome. Well, Zach, thank you for coming on. This has been a very enlightening conversation for us. We hope that we have provided some knowledge and some value as well. And we will link all of your podcasts and the website in the description. So if you want to check out more of Zach's content, he's a very interesting guy, as you can tell. And if you'd like to see more of his content, that'll be linked in the description. So thank you for joining us this week. And we're very excited to publish this.
Thank you, Mateo. Thank you, Ren. You guys are doing a fantastic thing here. And, similar to what I just said, I'd be very enthusiastic to see where you guys are at 10 years down the road, because if this is your mindset and this is where you're putting your time and your energy now, then it looks like it'll be a bright future for you guys. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for having me on.
Yep. Thank you, Zach. And for those of you who are still here, this has been the Gen Z Stoic podcast. Thank you for listening, and we will see you guys next week.